Good morning. Today is Friday, April 7th, 2023. It's 8:30 a.m. and we are going to do a bill introduction and first walkthrough on drafting request 230107, an act relating to the renewable energy standard. And we have counsel to take us through that first draft. So good morning. Thanks so much for coming in. And does everyone have a copy?
Yes.
Yes.
And is it on our website, Newsman?
Yes.
Thank you so much. If you can introduce it, include the time and date stamp, all that stuff, so that people who are following will know exactly what we're looking at, that would be great.
Good morning. Alan Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. We are looking at draft 5.1 dated 4/6/2023, 6:08 p.m. This is the first draft that's being reviewed publicly. There is no 1.1, just 5.1. So this is an update to the renewable energy standard. Starting on page 1, at the bottom of page 1, it's increasing the amount required under tier 1 of the renewable energy standard. So required amounts, the amounts of total renewable energy required by this subsection shall be 62% of each retail electricity provider's annual retail electric sales during the year beginning on January 1, 2024, increasing by an additional 9.5% each second January 1 thereafter, until reaching 100% on and after January 1, 2032. So there's a lot of numbers in this paragraph. So currently under tier 1, it's 50. It was set at 55% required renewable energy by 2017. That was 6 years ago. So the utilities are supposed to be on track to be higher than that. In this sentence, retail electricity provider refers to primarily, exclusively our electric utilities. And so it's raising the required 75% by 2032 to 100% by 2032. Now, I would be happy if someone would check my math.
I was just doing that.
So,
Does it not add up?
We have a physics teacher.
of course it adds up. I just don't know if it's exactly right.
You're not JFO. Like we can't.
Well, the reason is I neglected to check what the required amount is as of this year, because there was already a set schedule on the pace that they were increasing. Anyways, you can hear from other people on this exact number. I did math on a calculator, and so if someone else wants to check in who has additional information, perhaps a regulator,
Right.
I'd be happy to know.
So
If I'm concerned about the 9.5%.
okay, and so but the point is, in part, to get the number right, you need to know exactly what level we're at as of 2023 anyway.
Or do we need to know every single year what we're at? And it's applied to the new amount of electricity.
Can't you?
Right, I mean, whatever that gap is, there's also a question, and I don't know the answer. I mean, this is just a linear equal step every year. Someone might argue that there's a more useful or more economic way of doing it. I don't know the answer. But anyway, it's just a straight line. Takes the years from 2032, which divvies it up and makes
It does.
equal steps from here to there.
Well, I think it has to do with like compound interest or baseline, because at the end of the year, if you have reduced your energy use, is it 9.5% of the reduced amount of energy, or the one that we started out with?
I think it's what we started out with, right?
Here you're gonna add
This,
the requirement to have your portfolio include renewable energy. That requirement steps up every year already. It's in the RES, and we're just making it bigger steps to get to 100 by 2032 as opposed to 75 by 2032.
it checks out as far as I. But how much does it Right, how much is
Anyways.
this year?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, so we'll, maybe we ask JFO to check exactly where we're at.
Who do you want?
No,
to-
you
who
should
asking
probably
to
ask the
check?
PUC.
Oh, the
PUC
PUC.
or the department, I would suspect, since they are the ones who
Will do it to
regulate
help
the
us with the math
utilities.
check.
Yeah,
Okay. The other thing is, can you pause? Sorry, can you just say for people who are watching what construct we're amending? As I think people may not know. We're in the detail on tier one, but they might not understand the overall construct. Can you just say a minute or so about what elements of the RES are, please?
sure. So the renewable energy standard has 3 tiers and it applies to the retail electricity providers in the state, which are the electric utilities. Under the renewable energy standard, which is a performance standard, it's increasingly moving towards renewable forms of electricity as part of the utilities portfolio. So under tier 1, there's an overall requirement for total renewable energy. The chapter does define what constitutes renewable energy in the state. And so they have to increase the amount in every 3rd year, they increase the amount of renewable energy in their portfolio. And currently that has an end point of 75% of their portfolio needs to be renewable by 2032. And so this is increasing that to 100% by 2032. The second tier under the renewable energy standard is distributed renewable energy, and that is a requirement. See, I went to grab Title 30 off the shelf, but somebody already has it. That's all right, I have it on my iPad because I don't have the tier 2 requirements memorized. The tier 2 requires that there be distributed energy generation within the utilities portfolio. Distributed renewable generation is renewable generation with less than 5 megawatts of capacity. So it's smaller generation. And currently the requirement on that is 10% of their portfolio needs to be distributed renewable generation by 2032. And we'll talk more about that in the next section. And then tier 3 relates to energy transformation. It requires that starting in 2017, 2% of each retail electricity provider's annual sales have a renewable energy transformation project. And that also is increasing to 10% and 2/3%, 10 and 2/3% in 2032. And so this is different than the other types of projects. This is actually projects that change fossil fuel use, a fossil fuel use to an electric use. So it's different than the others, which require the construction or installation of renewable energy facilities. So these are 3 different requirements that the electric utilities need to comply with every year. The PUC is the regulatory body over this, and it is a performance standard. So under each of the tiers, the utilities have a number of different ways to comply. For the first 2 years, it usually involves renewable energy credits, RECs, and there is different ways that works. Can I stop there?
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean,
No, I want the full history. What was it like before 2017? Oh, sorry.
thank you. The other thing is, I didn't say anything as why did I want us to look into this again? I'm hoping we would look into it for roughly 5 years. This is like the 5th time, I think literally the 5th year in a row. And there's two reasons from my point of view. We have had a very clear policy of trying to electrify things, reduce fossil fuel use. And we keep referring to this as like, beneficial electrification, but even 75% by 2032 leaves 25% uncovered and unaddressed. So if we really want to make genuine claims of decarbonizing by shifting from a fossil fuel to electricity, then we should really decarbonize the supply. And some of our utilities already have, but not everyone. So there's that kind of a truth, whatever, standing behind the claims we'd like to make and the environmental benefits go along with. The second thing is on the equity side of things right now, if you're fortunate enough to have the opportunity and the which can translate through parts like home ownership, the right site, and financial means, you can be involved in generating your own clean energy. There are a lot of people, the 30% of Vermonters live in rental units, and then all the homes that are just not well situated because of trees or roof orientation, all that stuff, they are left out. And so I don't know of any other strategy that brings equally clean power to everyone than cleaning up the grid. It's 100%. It'd be great that we'll have energy pioneers on top of that who are doing even more, but it'd be great to have everyone who throws a switch know that they're part of doing the right thing on cleaning up how we do things. That's really, for me, the most compelling reason underneath it. Those two reasons. Right.
I know we have council here, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but how do you see this bill prioritizing in relation to the bills that we went over with coming from the House? Like, what is your hope for us with this bill?
So we'll have to, we're getting yet another iron in the fire.
Yeah.
But this is very narrow, so I'm hoping that we'll find a reasonable means to move it quickly.
And since this bill is obviously not come from the House,
Yeah.
is the hope that we would find another bill to connect it to, or that we would rather just work on it and make it a biennium bill?
I'd like to see it go this year,
Okay.
since it's 5 times at home plate wanting to.
And I don't know I actually don't know, I've never asked this question. Is it appropriate to ask council for a recommendation on a bill that has a similar jurisdiction or is germane that would be relevant to this topic? Or is that something, is that a political
Like a
question?
germane test in terms of where we might place.
Yeah, is there a bill that you see that relates to this that we're working on now? I don't see 120, I don't see biodiversity, I guess I don't.
I have an idea, but I can talk to you about the bills that are live, but I don't know the current status of some of them.
Okay, but you could at least advise on
Yeah, I can advise you on germaneness.
okay, then we don't need to do that now, but that's very helpful because I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways that we could get to the finish line.
Because this is an important bill to me as well. So I don't want us to spend time unnecessarily on it.
Yeah, no, this will not be time spent unnecessarily. I can guarantee that.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Thank
It's, for me, my highest priority from here to the end of the year.
Okay, that is good to know.
Okay. All right, onward to procurement.
So on page 2, it's adding new language, on line 6, still under renewable energy standard tier 1. Procurement. The commission is authorized to align existing procurement programs and establish one or more new procurement program for distributed generation that meets the criteria established in 8010 C1 of this title.
which is net metering.
Yes. So, Senator Bray, I don't know if you want to speak to this provision or if you'd like me to. So yes, 8010 is the net metering rules. It's the statute that directs the PUC to establish the net metering rules.
Well, for instance, if you could help and fill in the picture, there's more, I mean, we'll take testimony and address it, but one of the thoughts is we've lost some of the tools we had for clean energy generation. Standard offer is wrapped up, and so rather than just narrowly looking, it's in here to create an opportunity for a discussion around procurement and looking at things and the relationship between both parts. I don't know how else you might add what you might add to that. Okay.
So section 2 amends the definition section of this chapter, and it's amending the definition of net metering system. So net metering system means a plant for generation of electricity that is of not more than 150 kilowatt capacity, unless the customer demonstrates that the customer's usage will exceed 150 kilowatts, then it shall be not more than 500 kilowatt capacity.
My editorial comment on that one was, I think one of the strains with under net metering is that although it was originally intended, designed like a simple concept of spin your meter backwards at home, and the capacity kept growing till we got to 500 kW, and we ended up with sort of like small mini generating stations, which have led to some cost pressures and I would say some disagreements we could avoid by creating an opportunity that's better for everyone. Like on the developer side, that's developers are interested in being cost-effective participants in the marketplace. That's what I keep hearing. So that's part of where we get to on tier 2, that there may be a bigger tier 2 opportunity to do generation that would be all the way up to, I think, 5 megawatts rather than 150s, which are in the awkward place of, well, all net metering power is, every utility is obligated to take it. And there's definitely utilities for whom taking on more net metering power at the moment, I'm thinking like Washington Electric, it's an expensive proposition for them. So this brings that threshold down to 150, but also says if you are genuinely spinning the meter backwards, if your generation is going to be equal to or less than the load, you could still go up to 500. That is, you're set a pretty big meter to spin backwards. Senator Watson.
Thank you. So I have heard that there's somewhere in statute that says that no one customer can can benefit from more than 500 kilowatts generation. Is this that place, or is there a different place?
I think this is the place.
This
Yeah.
is okay.
So I just want to double back. There's a typo in this sentence. Sorry, that's why I got confused. So currently net metering is capped at 500 kilowatt systems.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. And this is where that cap happens. Okay. I have thoughts about that, but I'm gonna hold on.
And so there is a typo because 150 kilowatts needs to be underlined in the first part of that. It doesn't currently say that in the statute. It's 500 in the statute.
Yeah, I was like,
Sorry, I know.
from the underlined part, I was like, wait a minute.
I don't know. Listen, I wrote this last night.
It is.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Currently, the statute says 500 capacity. It does not say 150.
Thank you. Right.
Oh, yeah.
Word for all there.
Okay, and then finally, section 3. Section 3 is a session law provision, and it is a study essentially in a report. So at the bottom of page 3, on or before August 15th, 2023, the Joint Fiscal Office shall issue a request for proposal, an RFP, to analyze the costs, advantages, and disadvantages and impacts of increasing the amount of distributed renewable generation required under Tier 2 to 20% on or after January 1, 2032, or 30% on or after January 1, 2032, because currently it is 10%. On to page 4, the analysis shall include a full life cycle analysis of the costs and benefits of these levels of generation, including an examination of the potential value of such generation when designed in combination with other strategies to increase the value through measures such as generation co-located with sufficient load to consume the majority of the energy produced, generation that includes energy storage resources independent of control of the interconnected distribution utility, and generation that includes energy storage resources under the control of the interconnected distribution utility. The analysis shall also address additional impacts, including an increased revenues to the host municipality and the state, including revenues from brandless growth, and increased revenues to the state due to job creation. The Joint Fiscal Office shall contract with an independent third party to conduct the analysis described in this section. The independent third party shall consult with the relevant stakeholders and have the cooperation of the Department of Public Service and the Public Utility Commission. On or before January 14th, 2024, the analysis and recommendations shall be reported to the House Committee on Environment and Energy and the Senate Committees on Natural Resources and Energy and on Finance. And in fiscal year 2024, the amount of $25,000 in general funds is appropriated to the Joint Fiscal Office for the report described in this section.
So, editorial comment. We talked about procurement back on page 2, but really the biggest opportunity that I think far bigger than the additional build out of net metering between 150 and 500 is to be developing a scale up of 5 megawatts through Tier 2. And the question has been, 10% now. There's been, people express an interest in doing Vermont being more energy independent, providing more of our power, and so let's explore it. And the general, I think, concern that this committee has heard from utilities has been, well, don't obligate us to buy power that is more expensive than what we could go buy in the marketplace, something along those lines. Question is, okay, so on the development community side, I've also heard people say, look, give us a chance. We at times have changed, technologies are changing. We want to have an opportunity to do more. So we've been a little bit stuck. And I think part of the reason we've been stuck is we haven't had the data to say what is the full value of that in-state generation. And so this is the idea here is to get us unstuck by getting a report by the beginning of next session. The Department of Public Service is also doing a big campaign that wraps up by the end of December on public engagement and what is the public interested for a renewable energy future, that sort of thing. So these two reports will land at roughly the same time and put us in a much better spot to look at potentially increasing Tier 2. Maybe it goes to 20%, maybe it goes to 30%. I'm not prejudging the outcome at all, but I would love to see us have the data so that we could have a discussion based on data, sort out the merits, and move forward based on that. One of there's a couple things in this last section. So this was me noodling out a list of things that might, I've been calling a value stack, like value of the energy plus the associated values. So right now I'm thinking how, I didn't say anything about the value of the RECs generated.
Yeah.
I also didn't say anything about resilience. So I'd like the committee to really think about like, what are all the values that we might want to get data on? And so that report would let us see what the full value stack is for in-state renewable generation. And I'm entirely, this is a first cut at it. The other question I have is $25,000 is a placeholder. I don't know what a study this rigorous would cost. So we're trying to get some testimony on looking at other comparable studies and finding out what they cost and then budgeting enough so that we can buy a quality report for the end of the year. That's it. I'm gonna write down resilience.
Just one aside to add is that the climate action plan does recommend increasing the RES to 100% renewable.
Well, thank you. Right, forgot about that. Does the CAP say what year? Or just says recommending going to 100?
I'll need to check.
Okay.
And does it say anything about local?
I don't think so. I think they only discussed tier 1,
Okay.
but I can go back and check.
Right, so thank you, Mr. Kowski, thank you, committee. I would ask people to help improve the draft. You know, I wrote that on myself on my own copy, that part of that value stack that we're asking for data on. Assessing the value in terms of resilience. That was on the list. I don't know how you monetize resilience.
Yeah,
And the other one will be RECs generated or SRECs. And valuable. So I don't know how that might become part of the value stream that could be monetized and help make these assets more affordable. So if you have any thoughts, find an Easter egg with a clue that talks about this.
okay. It's a good weekend for it too.
It is. That's where I found most of these. I found them in NCR. All right, great. Thank you very much. So now we return to our the anti-degradation bill. And we have Mr. O'Grady with us remotely to help us walk through the next draft of the bill. So for people who are following, we were just looking at an RES bill. We've been working for the last 2 weeks episodically on the Vermont Water Quality Standards and the state anti-degradation implementation policy and associated rule that's being developed by the Department of Environmental Conservation. So with first of all, we're going to be going through a draft, and Mr. O'Grady, thank you very much for helping turn this around and bringing us a draft that's highlighting for all the changes. I want to thank all the parties involved, because I know that people have been meeting over and over again and working towards a consensus position. If all goes well, we might be able to vote a copy today. Maybe we end up with a wrinkle that needs to get ironed out over the weekend, but if we're not voting today on it, I hope that we vote on Tuesday and wrap up our business. But today would be an even better way to begin the holiday weekend. So with that, Mr. O'Grady, if you could introduce the current draft and call out the date and time stamp, all that, so that everyone knows they have the right copy, whether they're in the room or remote. That would be great.
Okay, should I put it on the screen?
Yes, please, thank you.
One second, Michael.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so you should have a committee bill draft request of 23-1011, draft 2.1, with a date stamp of 4/6/2023 and a time stamp of 3/45. That's a little not accurate because I only finished reviewing the bill this morning after I got the edits back from the editors this morning. I did not really draft this version of the bill. It was basically a draft provided by advocates and other stakeholders. So I have highlighted where there are changes, but I've also highlighted where I have questions. The changes are highlighted in yellow. The questions are highlighted in blue. So I will walk through the bill now.
Okay, thank you.
You will see, do you want me to walk through the whole bill? It's relatively short.
Yeah, let's do it as one. In its
Sure.
entirety. It'd be helpful to read through it that way. Thanks.
There's a finding section. The first 4 findings are similar, if not exact, to the past draft. The Federal Clean Water Act requires states to adopt an anti-DAG policy and requirements for implementation. ANR has initiated rulemaking for an anti-degradation implementation rule. The ANR anti-DAG implementation rule shall ensure that the level of water quality necessary to support uses of state water shall be maintained and water shall be managed.
So that's not.
No.
Is there an issue?
We're getting
Feedback.
Does anyone have a laptop open with a mic turned on?
Did this the other day too.
Usually. All right,
That's.
all right, so let's continue and see if it has resolved. Thank you.
Okay, the 4th finding, the ANR anti-DAG rule also shall clarify how proposed new discharges to state waters will be reviewed and permitted. And then the 5th finding, the ANR anti-DAG implementation rule. I don't think you have the right version up on the website. You don't. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can hear you. I have 2.1 in front of me on the table, and that's the correct one we're looking at, but it's not correct on the website, is it?
Yeah, so we'll ask, Ms. Newman, do you have the same copy that
Yes.
Mr. Grady has? Okay, so we'll check that out. Thank you, Michael.
I'm not sure what to do right now.
Well, let's keep going through the one that you have up on the screen matches what we have in hand in the room.
Hold on.
No, that's the one.
No, I'm sorry. I must have sent you the wrong version, Jude.
Okay, well, let's pause and sort it out.
It appears that we have the same version online and here, so.
It says 2.1, like what you sent me.
Okay, something happened. The subdivision 6 finding is not what the advocates proposed, so I don't know why. So I'll just move on. That needs to be fixed.
Okay, so we'll flag that.
And then going on to subdivision 7, there were multiple findings that were removed, some of which are now being incorporated into statute. And I have questions about whether or not the language that's being incorporated in statute is really what you want. It's great to put mandatory provisions and findings because they're not binding. But when you move that kind of language into statute and it's binding, you might create more issues than you thought. And so I'll walk through that when I get to those provisions. Going on to page 3. This is the section in statute on prohibitions on discharges. The first provision there, it says no person shall cause a discharge of waste into waters classified as Class A before July 1, 2023. But then you go down to line 8, it says the on-site disposal of wastewater from a system with a capacity of less than 6,500 gallons may be permitted within a Class A or Class B water. So I read those as potentially conflicting.
Sure.
And so I think really what lines 2 and 3 are saying is no person shall discharge into a water in Class A water before July 20, not one that's classified before July 1, 2023. No person shall initiate a discharge before July 1, 2023 into a Class A water, except for on-site disposal. And I would look to the advocates to see if that's because you're basically saying on line 8 and 9 that you can discharge into a Class A that was classified before July 1, 2023. So you have 2 conflicting statements.
Can we get some clarity on that?
Yeah.
Or should we, or what's your hope for the process? Would you like us to go through it, or now that there's maybe some?
Yeah, so why don't we go through it all and then double back to this one.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, the sense of the whole, and thank.
Okay. Then moving down on lines 5 and 6, it says that those discharges before July 1, 2023 have to have a capacity of 1,000 gallons per day or less, and that, or they're either exempt or they comply with the permitting requirements of Chapter 64 of this title. Chapter 64 is the on-site wastewater requirements. But that, so I have questions about that, and I'll bring those up in one second. On page 3, line 8, the draft that I received from the advocate started off where the blue "the" is. It started off with for all other waters, but I removed that because it didn't make sense to me. But I highlighted in blue just in case that the advocates really think for all other waters need to be in there. And then it says the on-site disposal of wastewater from a system with a capacity of less than 6,500 gallons per day may be permitted within Class A or Class B1 waters, provided that the permit is issued according to the requirements of section 1263 of this title. Well, that's the direct and indirect discharge permit section. It also has to be issued according to A&R's anti-degradation implementation rule. And it also has to be issued according to the permitting requirements of chapter 64 of this title, with just the on-site wastewater permit requirement. So as I read this, the on-site disposal of wastewater from a 6,500 gallon per day system, less than 6,500 gallon, has to get both a direct or indirect discharge permit and an on-site wastewater permit. I don't know if that was the intent. I could read it as requiring 2 permits, and I don't know if that was the intent.
Yes and not. And
I think this issue may have come about because originally there was not the 6,500 in there.
Right.
It was the permitting without the 6,500.
Right.
And that involved then both on-site and indirect, that 6,500 being the boundary between those 2
Right.
permitting programs. Now the 6,500 has been placed in this draft. It then causes the problem that Mike is referring to.
Okay,
Whether, I mean, it will, I assume we'll be chatting about 6,500.
yeah, thank you. Right, that's very helpful. Makes sense why it seems awkward at the moment. Okay, thank you. All right,
Then you go on and it says the on-site disposal of sewage from a system with a capacity of 6,500 gallons or more per day in a class 1 or B1 is prohibited except where necessary to address failing systems where the upgrade of an existing system improves water quality. The language on line 15 is in blue because I don't know if this is even necessary, because it in 10 VSA 1973, there's language called the best fix, which is just a nickname for it. It says that if the system fails, the agency will give a variance that, and the system fails and the technical standards of the on-site rule can't be met, the agency will issue a variance to install a replacement system that best meets the capacity or the constraints of the site. I don't know if you need that sentence from 13 to 16. And I don't know if anybody from the on-site program looked at it to say whether or not it creates problems for them. So that's my question. Do you need this language if you already have best fix in 10 VSA 1973 and in the on-site rules? And I don't know if it creates problems for the program.
They're like good PR.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I felt that this bit of conversation was kind of a compromise from what we had talked about, because I am in favor of enforcing 6,500 rule that is in here. But we heard testimony that this would then limit cases in which they are trying to resolve systems that are not functioning properly. So based on what we've heard from Mike O'Grady, that doesn't actually seem to have been a problem. So I guess my question would be, is this a misunderstanding of the legislation that we have currently and that we don't need to fix? Or policy-wise, does this actually go further than we need to? So I guess my value here is I don't want those things to be permitted, as Senator Watson had noted, unless there is that situation. So I would be very comfortable if we're taking this out based on what we just heard from Mike, but I don't know, because that seems like what we heard from the administration.
So I think the policy compromise is lines 8 through 13, where you're going to be able to permit a system with a capacity of less than 6,500 gallons in a class A or class B1. I think that's the policy compromise. What I don't think is necessary are lines 13 to 16, or I'm not sure it's necessary.
Okay, and that's in conflict to what we did hear from the administration, so I'd love to understand that more.
Okay.
I think the
Sure.
conflict,
Yeah.
thank you, sure, right. I think the conflict that Mike is referring to, he's correct in that if we were replacing one individual system of, say, 7,000 gallons with a second individual system of 7,000 gallons to replace that with a failing system. But our testimony was that in instances where there are several failing systems potentially, and the fix would be to have the small community system where the net water quality benefit derived from a potentially necessarily larger system that would pick up not one singular failing system, which is the variance language, but instead be able to provide for a solution that would incorporate several potentially failing systems and wind up then with the necessity for issuing a permit greater than 6,500, but still providing that net water quality benefit that the community was referring to. So I think that's the difference, Mike.
Okay, and so, but that isn't allowed for now under the best fix provision that Mike is talking about?
I think go ahead, Mike.
The best fix provision is an individual system.
Right.
Okay, okay.
So this would, I think the language that you highlighted in blue, Mike, would allow us the ability to address picking up several failing systems and going to a different lot potentially and providing a permit that would result in a net water quality benefit.
Okay.
I can
note that Hannah seems to desperately want to say something.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I saw Ms. Smith appear and disappear, so you want to chip in here?
I'm sorry. This is Hannah Smith with the Agency of Natural Resources. To answer Mike's question, this language referring to systems with a capacity of 6,500 gallons or more are not addressed under Chapter 64. The 1973 provision you're referring to.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
The on-site. So that's why the language about addressing failing systems is in there.
Okay.
Not making a policy argument. I'm just clarifying why that language was added from a legal standpoint.
That's a good point because the on-site rules only apply up to 6,500 gallons. That's my bad.
Okay, thank you. Senator McCormick.
Yeah, just I want to make sure, I want to orient myself that I'm where I think I am in this discussion. Best fix was a response, if I remember, to grandfathered systems that were failing. And the owner would be reluctant to improve it because that would trigger jurisdiction that they didn't have to deal with being grandfathered. So they would continue with a inadequate system rather than improve the system because they didn't want to improve it to the extent required by law once they got it.
That was certainly one situation, Senator McCormick. The other being that with the new permitting standards that required very specific and protected design criteria for a lot of lots, that those on that lot, there was just not the potential to be able to issue a permit for a system that met fully the design standards. So in the case of a failing system, the variance could be granted so that the system, as you indicated, could be improved and it could be permitted, even though it didn't meet the full suite of standards for a new system.
But then that would mean that the language before us now is not redundant or superfluous. It does something that was not already being done.
Correct. I think for several reasons, we support the continuation of this language.
Learning something new.
Yep. Okay, so, all right, we'll double back to that. I think that takes us to section 3.
So section 3, this is the section that relates to existing indirect discharges to waters of the state. Here, they're proposing that this is going to be indirect discharges to class B2 water, so not an A or a B1, from on-site disposal of sewage from systems with a capacity of 6,500 gallons per day or more, shall comply with and be subject to the requirements of this chapter. So you have to get an indirect discharge permit. And my question on this language, and it's not highlighted, but it's on line 21. Do we really need the July 1, 1991 date anymore? I think you might want to make it, really it would be the date that's the act is effective. It's hard to say what that is, but I don't think the July 1, 1991 date, I think is confusing. And I'd love the input of the agency about that.
This is Hannah Smith again. This language was adopted to retroactively allow permitting of existing systems. So, I mean, I agree the way that it's written right now doesn't have a lot of applicability, but
Right.
it was originally when the on-site program was beginning to issue permits for smaller systems. You'll notice that the end of the section has that language that we've struck that states that systems with a capacity of less than 6,500 don't require a permit. Obviously, that's not true anymore.
Right.
This is
Well, I have a question about that too. Shouldn't it say systems with less than 65 need to get the permit that's under 1259D?
I don't think that in this provision in 1263, that I think striking the last sentence achieves our purposes. I don't think there needs to be explicit language because the permitting requirements for the on-site program are addressed in chapter 64. That said, we could add language explicitly stating that those systems need to be permitted under chapter 64.
Or potentially under 1263 as the language reads right now under section 2.
Right. And so 1263 is the umbrella language that requires discharge permits. And the way discharge is defined is as direct or indirect.
Right. Which I just think is confusing the way that it's written there in 1259. Are you going to require an indirect discharge permit and an on-site permit?
An on-site permit is technically an indirect discharge permit. It's just
not under the indirect rule.
the division between those two permitting programs. I agree that the nomenclature is very confusing because one program is called the indirect discharge permitting program. But from a technical standpoint, the on-site wastewater permits authorize indirect discharges pursuant to chapter 64. I realize that I don't know if I'm providing a helpful explanation at this point.
I understand what you're saying, but are you going to issue one permit or two permits?
One permit.
Right, so somebody that objects to the permitting of that 6,500 gallon per day, less than 65, says the language says you need two permits.
Well, it says provided that the permit is issued according to the requirements of section 1263, which talks broadly about compliance with the water quality standards. And I would argue that the permit issued under the on-site wastewater program complies with the requirements of 1263. That is how the program is operated.
All right, so can you just say, provided the permit is issued according to the requirements of Vermont water quality standards, the ANR anti-DEG implementation rule, and the permitting requirements of chapter 64?
I would be comfortable saying just the permitting requirements of chapter 64. I believe that was how the agency drafted it.
Okay. All right.
I know. It's like, oh, yes, okay.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Well, so, let's, I'm gonna maybe put a pin in this one, but it sounds like I'm gonna ask the two lawyers who are sorting through this, as I said at the outset, maybe we were gonna have a clean enough copy to vote today.
Yeah, that was
Maybe
where I was.
Not, but it's sounding a little bit more like another round that brings our council and the advocates and your council into sync would be, it would be good to slow down for that extra lap. Make sure we get it right. Is that
Oh, should I-
something? So, Mr. O'Grady, can you work with Ms. Smith on that? As I know we're gonna do other edits, but can you get that sorted out with Ms. Smith for us for next Tuesday?
Yep.
Or Wednesday, or what's that? I just want to set a reasonable timeline.
I just got scheduled in the morning on Tuesday morning, so Wednesday might be the next available time.
Okay, so we'll aim for Wednesday at the moment, okay?
Okay. So could I go on and point out a few other things?
Sure, please.
So in section 4, this is amending the on-site permitting requirements. So currently, the on-site program works a little bit differently than some of the other A&R permit programs. They rely on professional engineers and licensed designers certifying that the wastewater system design meets the A&R technical standards. And that program works well, but the agency doesn't specifically scrutinize every system that comes in and that is permitted. Here, and I think it's a good proposal, is that with systems with a design flow of more than 1,000 gallons per day located in a Class A, and it should say or Class B1 water. I don't know why. Drafts. I'm sorry, I already made that change, but I'm just a little flummoxed. But systems with a design flow of more than 1,000 gallons per day that are located in Class A or Class B1 watershed shall be reviewed by the secretary to determine if there would be a measurable reduction in the chemical, physical, or biological quality of the receiving water as a result of the system. So basically doing an anti-DEG analysis, and when necessary, the secretary shall conduct a tier 2 analysis that includes a site-specific analysis and cumulative impact analysis. What is when necessary? And then secondly, this act goes into effect on passage, and the tier 2 analysis language is in the anti-DEG implementation rule. It is not in section 29A-105, and neither is the cumulative impact analysis. There is no reference to the cumulative impact analysis in 29A-105. And so if this act goes into effect on passage, potentially before the anti-DEG implementation rule, the reference to the tier 2 analysis has no context. And so I'm not really sure why this act has to go into effect on passage.
Okay, those are like good questions. Especially like, maybe we walk through them. And what's your time constraint this morning, Mr. O'Grady, so that we make sure we get at least a walk through?
10:15.
10:15, okay. Someone in the room want to comment on when necessary, which seems a little hard to know how do you know what's necessary and what's not?
Sure, right. That was a reference to the discussion we've had about evaluating the location, size, scale of the system relative to the watershed. A small system located distant from the receiving water in a watershed that has thirsty soils would not result in an impact, and therefore would not trigger the need. A larger system potentially located closer to the receiving water in a smaller watershed might result in the need to look further at it. And so that evaluation that would occur as part of the review of these systems take into account the nature of the system, the nature of the watershed, the nature of all of the other variables that would be involved, the soil, scale. So that, when necessary, refers to that analysis that would be done by the permitters when they receive an application in one of these watersheds.
That certainly seems like a very reasonable answer. I don't know if codifying it this way as when necessary is agreeable to the committee and everyone in the room, or people are looking for something more definitive that sort of reflects what you just said. And I don't know if what you just said is expressed elsewhere in statute or
Yeah.
rule.
We do speak in the anti-degradation implementation rule as to the location, size, and scale, and we have quite a lengthy paragraph that we've been working on refining the language to make it more clear.
Okay. Nathan, can you say, Mr. Overspeak, can you say anything about the when necessary bit? Seems like a good question to me, reading through, just if I'm reading the plain language, it would, if I read that, I'd say, how do I know what's necessary or not?
For the record, Mason Overstreet, staff attorney, Conservation Law Foundation. This, Pete articulated kind of how we arrived on it. I don't think I can say very much more other than that was what we agreed on for. It is a hard thing to articulate in statute, given the, I would say, kind of, discretion given to the agency on the distance and proximity to the receiving water and the fact specific situation of each one. So.
So I'm gonna,
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Carroll.
Jared Carpenter, Lake Champlain Committee. If, this is really more of a question, if when necessary was removed, would it still offer the agency the same amount of discretion as to when to do the analysis? Or would it make it mandatory?
Well, is it going to be required under the anti-deg rule when you do this analysis?
It's an element in the anti-degradation rule, Mike, that looks at the potential for impact of a given project on the receiving water. So it's an element in the tier 2 analysis, and referring to tier 2 in here related, I don't want to jump ahead, but referring to tier 2 in here related to the policy, water quality standards, the policy and the water quality standards do call out the tier 2 analysis, not to the detail provided for in the procedure, but we could certainly reference the procedure as well.
So the tier 2 would provide a when it is necessary. So does it say when it's necessary in statute?
How about when you say, and when required by the anti-degradation implementation rule, the secretary shall conduct a tier 2 analysis that includes a site-specific analysis and a cumulative impact analysis as required under the Vermont water quality standards to ensure the protection of Class A and Class B1 waters.
Okay. And that would be crossing out the when necessary and saying when required by. And that's the change.
And then you get rid of the reference to 29A-105, which doesn't include a cumulative impact analysis. Although I think it is required under the water quality standard. So.
Wait, now I'm confused
We
now.
were getting close there.
It does not, or it does require?
The standards do require this specific language in the anti-deg policy is kept brief and as a placeholder or as a reference point to head out to the implementation procedure, which is 13 pages of detail. So the standards you need to comport with the anti-deg policy. Our rule says how we do that. So a reference to the rule could be more.
But it's not needed, is what Mike's point is.
No, I think the reference to 29A-105 is not needed. I think reference to the water quality standards in general I think that's more accurate than referencing 29A-105.
I understand. So we would cross
Yeah,
out,
we should be-
So are we,
As necessary part of it, is still.
we would keep the cumulative impact analysis.
Yep.
This. Okay,
Yep.
that's the part that I'm trying to, okay, sorry,
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep up with this.
Yeah. Sarah,
Thanks. I've got a usage nerd issue here. When required by, and then there's a citation. If something is required by the part of law being cited, then it would seem to me that the language here is unnecessary.
Well, that's,
When required by, then this should happen. Well, we already know that because it's required. Why are we saying it at all?
Because that's where we're stuck.
you've identified the,
The words
Oh, I'm not
that are
saying-
written don't mean
you
what they
know.
say.
well, isn't, so let me step back and my thought that what we were trying to get at is that it's in the rule, but by writing, since statute controls rule, we're putting some belt and suspenders on by being explicit in statute that this rule should include these provisions, this analysis.
Right,
you
and
might
statute trumps rule, so if you want this requirement to be
Right.
there, you would put it in statute.
So that was the part, thank you, Michael, it's not entirely redundant.
So something happens that
It's an
would not happen
assurance.
without, all right.
That the rule will carry this provision, and if the rule didn't, it would still control. Okay, so,
Okay.
Michael, you make that edit, thank you. And we'll-
Moving on. So then you get to section 5, 10 VSA 1252. There's a couple of different sections in law related to the classification of state waters. This is one of them. This specifically relates to or is titled the classification of high quality waters and mixing zones. And the Vermont water, the Federal Clean Water Act requires states to update their water quality standards every 3 years. And so this language is saying during that triennial rulemaking for the water quality standards, the secretary shall propose to reclassify any waters where water quality data meets or exceeds the minimum criteria for a higher class for one or more designated uses and have been proposed as candidate waters for reclassification by the secretary. Or the secretary has received an administratively and technically complete petition for reclassification. So I've got questions about this language and specifically about that last phrase, or the secretary has received an administratively and technically complete petition for reclassification. So I could read this as saying the secretary shall propose to reclassify any waters where the secretary has received an administratively and technically complete petition for reclassification. Do you understand what I'm saying? That it doesn't necessarily have to be where the water meets or exceeds the minimum criteria. It could just be where the secretary has received an administratively and technically complete petition.
no, we don't want that.
Right, it would sound very odd that way.
Yeah.
I thought when we talked about this, it was that it wouldn't, in order to have it be administratively complete, it would have required A&R to have gone out and done the sort of data validation that's referred to in the first half of that sentence. So it wouldn't be administratively, it couldn't qualify as administratively complete until the data analysis that supported it being reclassified was presented in the application.
So the waters of the state are classified under rule, and any person can petition for an agency to adopt a rule. So I read this as any person can submit an administratively and technically complete petition for reclassification of any water, and the secretary has to do it.
So we don't like
There, our intention, Chair Bray, was that an administratively complete petition would include all of the elements, the map, the list of data, et cetera. The technical completeness would be reviewed by the agency relative to our data standards to evaluate whether the data was compelling, whether if we accepted it as being administratively technically complete, we would be essentially saying this is a compelling petition and something that should move forward into rulemaking. If it had a paucity of data or the data did not meet our data standard, then we wouldn't deem it as being technically complete. We would ask for more data, and then eventually, deny the petition based upon that lack of that information. So that was our thought, Mike, was that this would be information coming in that we may not be aware of. Frankly, this will probably be the very rare case, but regardless, that if there were someone out there, a group or an individual that had this type of data that we did find compelling, that, oh, this should be an A1 or a B1 water, we would then declare it administratively technically complete after review and then move that into process.
Okay, so here's a proposal. During the triennial rulemaking, the secretary on her own petition or on the receipt of an administratively or technically complete petition, shall propose to reclassify any waters where water quality data meets or exceeds the minimum criteria for a higher class for one or more designated uses.
Great, so you're pulling it up, okay.
Is that your intent, Pete?
Yes, it is, Mike.
Okay,
You're getting nods all around the room.
okay.
Thank you.
And that similar change would be made on line 17 through 20 because you have similar language there as well.
Great. And Senator Watson, you have your.
Oh, no, that is a much more elegant fix than what I was thinking.
Going on to section 6, 1253I. Again, this is one of those sections in law that relate to classification of waters. This is a report requirement that the agency reports to the General Assembly on the status of very high quality waters on Class A and B1. The report includes a listing of the waters where water quality data meets or exceeds the minimum criteria for a higher class for one or more designated uses that have been proposed as candidate waters for reclassification. It includes the Secretary's observation about whether the General Assembly's decisions with the 1,000 gallon per day indirect discharge prohibition actually improved Secretary's overall ability to reclassify waters, the number of wastewater system permits and other discharge permits issued in very high quality waters, and progress made and difficulties encountered during reclassification. I think that's a good report. I think that it's actually one of those, benchmark reports that the General Assembly likes to get in order to measure the efficacy of a program.
Okay.
Section 7.
Check. Okay, thank you.
Section 7. I get what they're trying to do, but I don't know what the ultimate result is. So basically, the anti-degradation policy can apply to both point sources and non-point sources. And there's obviously non-point source pollution in the state from agriculture and silvicultural activities. But the anti-deg policy is not applied to them under the RAPs or the AMPs. And so I get the kind of intent of this group is to review and investigate whether the non-point source pollution from ag and silviculture basically is impairing waters and in violation of the anti-degradation policy. I get that. My question is, what could this group recommend? Because stormwater runoff from silviculture and agriculture is exempt under federal rule from a discharge permit. It doesn't need a NIPD's permit. So I look at this and I'm like, yes, I get what you're doing, but what legislative or administrative rule changes are even possible? Would you be amending the RAPs and the AMPs? And if that's what you're looking at, I would say something specific in sub 2 about, because right now it just says whether legislative or administrative rule changes are necessary. Necessary for what? And so that's my question on this language. I get what they're trying to do. I just don't get what would come out of this process. And I think you need additional specificity about that.
And, so, well, let me look to, you know, the advocates in the room that there was a shared concern about water quality, and it's like, okay, so what are other stressors of water in the state of Vermont? And we know that non-point source discharges or non-point source pollution plays a role. And I think we're looking at how do we understand that better and look at options for making improvements. And that's the way I would have said it as a lay person. I don't know if Mr. Overstreet or Mr. Carpenter, if you want to chip in anything more precise, given the limitations of what Mr. Regis is pointing out, that they're carved out differently federally in law. So I don't know how to get at that.
Excuse me, yes, so obviously the point is the question of whether or not the RAPs or the AMPs are adequate at protecting high quality waters as they currently exist.
Yes.
Now granted, there's not a lot of farms next to, there's not a lot of farms next to high quality waters. It's really more towards the forestry side of things, but I guess, yes, Mr. Chair, the recommendation would be to come back, identify whether legislative or administrative rule changes are necessary to, you know, for the protection of Class A and Class B1 waters, or something along those lines. I mean, 98% of our waters right now is B2. It's probably going to be at least for now, a narrow application, but the thought was, since there's an exemption with these practices can still affect high quality waters, the groups would get together and attempt to hash it through. I don't know if Mason has something else.
Yeah, Mr. Overstreet.
Thank you, Chair Bright. Michael, I see your point. What we're getting at here, and I think Mr. Groveman is on the Zoom call as well, is during the stakeholder process for the anti-degradation implementation rule, Michael, as you know, the Clean Water Act does allow jurisdictional reach into non-point source pollution. And so the question is, if you're thinking about kind of clarifying it or making the language a little more acute, we could say whether administrative rule changes are necessary to the anti-degradation implementation rule, just to explicitly call it out,
as opposed to changing the rest.
Right, but to the anti-deg implementation rule for the purposes of reviewing non-point from ag and silviculture, right?
Yes.
Okay. That makes sense to me. That does.
Okay, then yeah, that does, because I appreciate your point on kind of the jurisdiction of non-point, but I'm curious, Mr. Groveman.
Yeah, is Mr. Groveman on?
Yes.
We can't see him, but
Because of the screen.
okay, well that's okay. Mr.
I'll
Groveman,
stop
do you
sharing if you want.
That's, I don't think people need to see me. I'm fine not being. But no, I agree with what Mason said. I think Mike raises a good point. We don't want some of the ideas we talked about in the stakeholder group was should the RAPs and AMPs have additional management practices if there were agricultural, silvicultural activities in high quality waters? Should the process be different under the AMPs right now? it's a really voluntary program. There's not notification. Should there be some procedural changes that could be added to the AMPs for notification of a county forester or forest and parks if there is logging in a class A or B1 water, and potentially other remedies, but those are the main ones that we talked about. And obviously the anti-degradation rule does not require any of those things right now, but we thought this would be a good way to have the conversation to see if the anti-deg rule and the RAPs and AMPs should be amended to include some of those things.
All right, that makes sense to me. That gives me more context for subdivision B2 on lines 8 and 9. So I understand what you're looking for now.
As expressed, does it make sense, or would you propose an edit to us all?
Well, I liked Mason's suggestion, but then John's suggestion or discussion went a little bit further than that. So it may not just be changes to the anti-deg implementation rule. It may be whether the statute should be amended or administrative rule changes are necessary to apply the anti-deg implementation rule to non-point from farming or silviculture, including potential changes to the RAPs and the AMPs, something like that. I don't know.
Senator McDonald.
We keep using words like voluntary program, and I don't know what that is. Is that like the honor system, or we don't draw lines.
Well,
this is the second time we've taken this subject up in the world. The words tile drains, which are basically secret because people that build them don't have to record where tile drains are, notwithstanding the dig smart rules we have for other places. And we don't discuss what's going on. I mean, there was a guy that drowned. He was found drowned and there was water in his lungs. And they said he hadn't drowned because there was no discharge from the place that allegedly drowned him, according to statute. That's a phony story, but we define things and then that are not true, and then give them the force of law and wonder why the anti-degradation policy is flawed, because we declare certain degradation not to be unlawful or not even to count. And then
there's a lot
our solution is to get together and hash it out.
Council has something for us.
Do you want a response to that?
Yes.
I haven't gotten one. I brought it up before.
So going back to the original question, what does voluntary mean for the AMPs? The AMPs are a rule, but they are not mandated for every timber harvest. It's up to the harvester whether or not they are going to implement the AMPs and the specific management measures in the AMPs. But if they don't implement the AMPs and there is a water quality violation, they are subject to enforcement. In addition, under current use, the forest management plan for anyone who has enrolled forest land has to comply with the AMPs. So, Commissioner,
if I may, Mr. Chair, all of what we're hearing is true, but the people who have are complying to this don't have to tell the people that would inspect that within the next 3 weeks we're going to be in there working. They have no obligation to inform the people that would check to see if the AMPs are being carried out. They simply can do it when they want to without informing anybody that it's about to take place. So often, by the time anyone notices that something may or may not be amiss, it has already happened. And there was no one around to see what went wrong, because the foresters that oversee this stuff don't know that it's taking place this week or next week or the week after or this month.
Mind-boggling.
Senator McDonald, are you suggesting that this legislation should address that concern? Or are you just
No,
blowing
I'm
off steam?
the system that we have for regulating our water.
No, I understand your point.
Doesn't work, and we're not fixing it.
No,
We're allowing it to continue in a more collegial fashion without calling people to account and double checking on them. And
I'm asking
as
you,
a result of the orders,
I followed you up to this point, and I'm with you. What's the next step? What are you suggesting we do about this?
call a tile drain, and then have a policy for it that is connected to the quality of our waters, instead of saying, well, statutorily, a tile drain isn't
It
a
doesn't
district.
exist, yeah, I know.
And that's just a kind of poster child.
I'm sorry.
So can I just say, it's
Please.
a sign of spring when Senator
Oh.
McDonald brings up the harvest notification issue. It's definitely an issue that he has held close to his heart for a long time, since 2015, from my recollection. So it's heartening to hear it again.
Well, it's a sign of spring, so the water from the ditch fields will be coming across the class 3 road that comes to my house in the next week or so. If it rains.
So the only other issue that I have with the draft is whether or not the effective date should be on passage, or should it be contingent to the adoption of the anti-DEG implementation rule.
My impression is it doesn't quite make sense if it's not contingent, because we're gonna refer to a rule that doesn't include the features that we're all agreeing we'd like to
Right.
see operative.
Right, and I think that makes sense. I mean, Senator McDonald, Senator Bray, you just sat through the Agency of Ag's pesticide rule, which dragged out for a long time in Elkhart. And I'm not saying that will happen with ANR's anti-DEG implementation rule, but the possibility is there. So this statute very reasonably could be enacted prior to adoption of the anti-DEG rule. And I think you don't want to create that disconnect.
Yeah, okay. Anyone disagree with the notion of making it contingent? Great, thank you. Of making the statute contingent upon the passage of the rule that we're referencing here.
Or yes, it wouldn't be effect on passage, it would be.
On approval of the rule, the ANTI rule.
And we don't need a date.
Or say, will the rule not include how does the rule that we're going to expect deal with tile drains? We, the legislature, have declared that for the purpose of looking at water being discharged into our streams, a tile drain does not legally do that.
No, I think we understand your point, Mark. I'm wondering
So I was
where
asking
we
the
go.
question, is the route that's being proposed, am I satisfied that that's a good step forward? And my answer is, it doesn't deal with the issues and the point that you agree with that I made, then my answer is no. And at which point you could say, I'm against taking a step forward.
I'm not saying,
One could say,
I'm,
So I would propose, Senator McDonald, if you want to address that, I mean, so there you have tile drains was one thing you're mentioning, and AMPs, cultural practices is the second. I would ask that you consult with, maybe with the advocates in the room and the department and the agency as, or at least with Mr. O'Grady to get language drafted, because we're in the language drafting business on this issue, and the issue you're raising, no one is saying, oh, this doesn't exist, but we have to, we're gonna need something in language in order to respond to it.
we're back to, I remember a witness here a few years ago, when we were struggling with how to clean up Lake Champlain. The chair was saying to the witness, well, come up with a language, come up with a language, come up with the language. And the witness finally said, it's not my job to come up with the language, it's my job to sue you when the lake continues to be polluted. And what we do when we are unable to come up or get our drafters or get the organizations that espouse the importance of clean water are ready to sit down and not come up with a language, you turn to me and say, I'm supposed to come up with it. So,
Senator McDonald, I'm happy to work with you if you'd like on this exact issue. Would it be helpful, maybe you and I can talk on Tuesday before and we could work with Ellen to see, or sorry, Mike, I'm so used to Ellen at this point.
It's fine.
But we could work with Michael to maybe come up with something that helps satisfy your concern. Would you like to do that?
suddenly it's my concern.
Well,
All our
So-
concerns.
it is not a concern that would I need to see in the bill, but I respect what you're saying and I'd like to make sure that we do have a conversation about it. Would that be helpful to work together on language? Because I will be not considering.
I will ask Mr. O'Grady to come up with a language that identifies tile drains as sources and et cetera, and then we'll see what the committee thinks of that.
Well, could I just
Please.
maybe sand that recommendation down a little and
Yeah.
instead of saying that they are point sources, to have that group, that stakeholder group that's looking at application of anti-dag to ag and forestry, have them recommend how to regulate tile drains
Yeah.
for consistency with the state's water quality standards. Because it's a complicated issue. It is, it's more complicated than they are definitely a point source or they're not a point source. They have been held to be point sources in certain cases, but sometimes they don't reach a water. So are they then an indirect discharge? So what it's a little bit more complicated than they're always going to be a point source.
Well,
Sometimes they are.
With the ground. Yeah.
So, Mr. O'Grady, could you draft language for the study that reflects those two concerns Senator McDonald has raised around tile drains and silvicultural practices?
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, there you go. That's a start. Okay.
And then we'll at least have to look at and have a discussion about.
You're bringing up the issue though.
All right, any other questions about the language in the study? So I didn't catch exactly what Mr. O'Grady and Mr. Overstreet passed back and forth, but there was an edit discussed, and maybe you could just review what that is and then incorporate that into the next draft as well.
Into the stakeholder group?
Yeah.
So I think it's a little bit after after listening to Mason and John, I would probably say it's something along the lines, and then Senator McDonald, identify whether statutory changes or administrative rule changes are necessary to ensure that non-point source pollution from agriculture and silviculture comply with the Vermont water quality standards, including whether point source discharges should be regulated, or how points, including how point source, how tile drains should be regulated under state water quality requirements, how and whether forestry harvesting or timber harvesting should notify the state of initiation of a harvest, whether the AMP should be mandatory for all harvests, etc. Something like that.
Okay, so let's spell all that out, and it'll be helpful to have it explicit and written out, and we can go through it on, we'll get it. So Mr. O'Grady, I know you're busy in your committees on Tuesday. Is it possible to get a draft on Tuesday? So that when we reconvene on Wednesday, people could have reviewed it prior to coming to committee?
Yeah, I'll try to do that. I should be able to get you something maybe Monday afternoon.
Monday.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you very much. All right, so I'm just trying to think of the next draft. We flagged quite a few things. Yeah, we are scheduled for break in 3 minutes. So we'll take that break for 15 and then resume, and that will provide people with a little chance to stretch their legs, think about this, and then we'll come back and wrap up what we can agree on to roll into a next draft. Mr. O'Grady, will you be gone after 10:30? Yes?
I have until 10:15.
Okay, great. So it'll be on us to take clear enough notes to communicate to you any other agreed upon changes to the sections that we've been through. I know that you have.
Okay.
And if we have anything more,
I could in my making changes, could I confer with the agency and the advocates?
Absolutely.
So, right.
Okay, great. So